This is the CBS Evening News. Bob Schieffer reporting. Good evening. For congressional Democrats these days, the troubles just keep piling up. After a week when Speaker Jim Wright and his problems dominated the news, congressional Democrats awoke to even more unexpected headlines today. The number 3 man in the House leadership, California Congressman Tony Coelho, has also decided to quit. Deborah Potter has our report.
It was a stunning surprise. The number 3 Democrat in the House, Tony Coelho, calling it quits rather than face a protracted investigation of his financial dealings. Today, secluded at home, he met and talked with friends who explained his decision.
He said, I'm just not going to let them tear down all of the good things that I spent 10 years building up, and I don't want the party to suffer. We've suffered too much.
Coelho's departure is yet another blow to the Democratic leadership in the House, coming amid indications that Speaker Jim Wright will resign next week, with ethics charges pending against him. Coelho is under scrutiny for questionable trading in junk bonds. In a statement, he said the charges against him are needless and baseless, but they did put him under a cloud.
We're living in a time now where even perception gets translated into reality. And it does make it very difficult for people to function in public policy if there is a perception.
Coelho was a rising star in the Democratic Party, a tireless campaigner and successful fundraiser, not only for his party, but also for the cause of the disabled. Coelho has epilepsy. His California farming district was shocked by his decision.
I think they're losing a good man, so I don't think he can be replaced.
He was for the farmers and the little people.
But many congressional Democrats are breathing a sigh of relief today in the hope that a year of political agony may finally be coming to an end.
We are not in a crisis. The Democratic Party or the Congress are not in a crisis. We're going to address ourselves to the legislative issues that face the country. We'll resolve the leadership issues very soon.
With a clean slate, the Democrats believe they can put any political damage behind them.
These questions of personal scandal are not going to have a dramatic partisan impact. The public reaction when something like this takes place is, they're all a bunch of crooks in both parties.
Many members now hope the tense atmosphere in Congress will soon begin to fade so they can get on with business and get the ethics battle over well before next year's elections. Deborah Potter, CBS News on Capitol Hill.
Coming as it does in the wake of Jim Wright's troubles, the Coelho resignation will trigger a wholesale turnover in the House Democratic leadership. At this point, Majority Leader Foley, the number 2 Democrat in the House, is the odds-on favorite to succeed Wright as Speaker. The early favorite to replace Foley is Missouri Congressman Richard Gephardt. Very popular with his colleagues, he'd been planning another run for the Democratic presidential nomination in 1992, but now he's expected to renounce any presidential aspirations. Georgia Congressman Ed Jenkins, less well-known but highly respected by his colleagues, is expected to be Gephardt's main challenger. 3 congressmen, Bill Gray of Philadelphia, former chairman of the House Budget Committee, Beryl Anthony of Arkansas, who heads the Congressional Campaign Committee, and Michigan's David Bonnier, who currently serves as chief deputy to Coelho, are the leading contenders for the job of Majority Whip, the job now held by Coelho, and the 3rd-ranking post. And as part of our Washington Notebook segment tonight, joining us now from Washington is Maryland Congressman Steny Hoyer, Vice Chairman of the House Democratic Caucus. Congressman, you were one of those who visited with Congressman Coelho this afternoon. One of the things that Congressman Foley said that sort of interested me, he said the House Democrats are not in a crisis. If you're not in a crisis, what are you in right now?
In transition. And I think that's what Tony Coelho wanted us to be in rather than in crisis. And because he's one of the best political analysts in this country, he made a decision that continuing to have investigations and focus on investigations and not on substance was not in the best interest of the House or of the country, and from a personal standpoint, not in the best interest of himself and his family. So that is why I think he made this very decisive and bold move.
Well, Congressman, I must say it's all a bit peculiar. I mean, it's not often that people in Washington who have powerful positions say, I'm innocent of everything they're accusing me of, so I've decided to quit this post. I mean, what's happened here? What's going on?
Well, it is very unusual, and I think it's because Tony Coelho is an extraordinary leader, and I think he has the ability, which most of us don't have, is to look reality in the eye and say to himself, look, this is going to be a protracted effort to show that I have not violated any laws, that I may have made a technical mistake, but I've not violated any laws or ethical rules. Because it's going to be protracted, I need to get out and go on with my life and do something else. With the Speaker's investigation, we have seen the House for 4 months of this first session focused almost entirely on that. We're working, but the focus is not on the business of the House by the public and by the media. I think Tony's actions really said very loudly that we need to get about the business of addressing the budget deficit, addressing the savings and loan crisis, addressing the environmental problems, the drug problem confronting our country, education, child care, family leave, all of those issues that he felt very strongly about, he thought would get short shrift if the continued investigation that Wright has found himself in is protracted by Congressman Coelho's problems as well.
Let me just ask you very quickly, Congressman, how badly has the party been hurt and how badly have House Democrats been hurt by all of this?
I think in the very short term, the party has clearly been hurt. We've lost an extraordinary leader in Tony Coelho. There's a possibility the Speaker might decide as well to leave. Luckily, because the Democratic Party has a very deep bench of very talented, very able people who are very experienced in the House of Representatives, I think we're going to be equally strong, and I think the American public in the very near term is going to see a very strong, effective Democratic leadership in the House of Representatives.
Thank you very much, Congressman.
Thank you.
Congressman Steny Hoyer of Maryland. A man armed with starters pistols and jackknives tried to force an American Airlines jet to Cuba today, but the plane en route from Dallas landed in Miami, which was its original destination, and the hijacker surrendered. He's described as a Cuban refugee who escaped from a mental hospital. None of the 157 people on board was injured. And still ahead on tonight's CBS Evening News, a papal audience for President Bush, and later they're off and playing in the Olympics of piano competition. To use the summit to show Mikhail Gorbachev's momentum in arms reduction proposals, or at least slow it. Well, we have more from White House correspondent Wyatt Andrews in Rome.
He is a president preaching caution and strength against the Soviets, but George Bush debuted in Europe with a man of peace, Pope John Paul II.
While we're still far from realizing the biblical injunction to turn our swords into plowshares, we've made progress in reducing armaments and in decreasing the threat of war.
May God bless America and make her strong in her defense of human dignity.
This two-day stop in Rome begins, in effect, a new presidential campaign to take the global peace initiative away from Mikhail Gorbachev. The White House is now encouraging speculation that the president will bring new headline-grabbing proposals to the NATO summit this Monday. One idea for the United States to remove thousands of American soldiers now stationed in Europe. Another possibility, rewarding Gorbachev's withdrawal from Afghanistan by lifting the economic sanctions imposed after the invasion 10 years ago.
The president clearly will be discussing a number of ideas. Many of them have not been presented before.
The idea of bringing bold new proposals to NATO is a sharp change in direction for a president who has defined himself as cautious. The White House claims it's partly because Gorbachev has now promised to meet most NATO demands for drastic cuts in East Bloc troops.
Difference is the Soviet Union put on the table in Vienna a concrete, comprehensive proposal with numbers, with proposals and ideas that said, we're coming around to the NATO way of thinking. That is new.
Still, the president's hardest job is arguing that NATO should stay strong now. With much of Europe already convinced that Gorbachev is the peacemaker, and with the squabble over West German short-range missiles still unsolved, Mr. Bush has to prove he has the vision to lead the alliance. Wyatt Andrews, CBS News, Rome.
As President Bush prepares for that NATO summit, a new CBS News New York Times poll out tonight shows that Americans overwhelmingly approve of the presence of U.S. troops in West Germany. Majority also believe the U.S. has the right number of troops stationed in Europe. Well, joining us now in Brussels, CBS News State Department correspondent Bill Plant. Well, Bill, let's talk about these supposed troop reductions. Is that going to happen, and how's it going to play in Europe?
Well, Bob, it is likely to happen, and the president is trying for a sort of hat trick here. After weeks and months of being on the wrong end of Mikhail Gorbachev's PR offensive. What the president is trying to do is bring these troops down by 10%, about 38,000, which is the amount that they would be reduced if the U.S. signed an arms agreement on conventional arms with the Soviets. Now, that's 5 or 6 years down the road. If Mr. Bush does it sooner, he sort of preemptively takes the credit. He also saves a lot of money, and he also gives the Germans a taste of what life would be like without the troops to protect them and the money that those troops bring into their economy. If he can pull all that off, he'll be a lot better off than he was going into this summit.
And the other big question, of course, before this summit is, will this controversy be worked out between the allies? It sort of has the United States and Great Britain on one side, and some of the other allies, including West Germany, on the other, about whether they ought to negotiate on the short-range missiles that are left in Europe now with the Soviet Union to get rid of.
Well, Bob, it's pretty clear that the controversy will not be worked out now before the allies actually all meet here starting tomorrow night. And the reason is that the Germans are in a box. They're caught between the United States on one side and their own sort of left wing or left parties on the other. The United States insists that you have to have a nuclear deterrent to back this up, to make the presence of U.S. troops worthwhile, and to make the deterrent mean anything. And the left wing of the German coalition insists that eventually you should be able to get rid of those nuclear missiles, which would, after all, only explode on German territory anyway. So what will happen? Nobody wants a big fight over this. Since they can't agree, they'll try and paper it over. They'll talk about what a wonderful job the alliance has done in keeping the peace for 40 years and hope that nobody notices, especially if the president offers that big troop cut.
All right. Thank you, Bill. And we'll be back in just a minute with the latest from China after this.
If you thought you had to give up comfort to get a close shave, Norelco says, think again. Their revolutionary shaving system shaves skin close in a way that's incredibly comfortable. As the hair enters the chamber, the patented lift and cut system lifts each hair and holds it a split second before a blade cuts it, so it's possible to shave skin close without the blades even touching the skin. The lift and cut shaving system from Norelco. We made close comfortable.
Now's the time to get out and go. Hit the great American road. Get up, get over, get smart. Your Buick dealer is the place to start. Now's the time, now's the time. Hit the road, hit the road. The great American road. 'Cause the great American road belongs to Buick.
Look, they're my parents, and I tell you, they're acting different. I mean, they go dancing. Herbert and Jane dancing. I know, Mother thinks it's fun. She wears eye makeup now. I don't know what's gotten into them. Whose is this? Why don't they act their age?
To help them get more out of life, people are eating better. Some have found Kellogg's Product 19, 100% of 12 vitamins and minerals. Feel good about yourself.
Tennis? They don't play tennis.
Feel like 19 again.
The hardline faction of China's leadership picked up more support today, and student leaders suggested the time has come to wind down their historic Beijing protest. Bruce Morton now with that report.
It may be ending. Some student leaders have proposed ending the Tiananmen Square protest May 30th, this coming Tuesday, after staging one final victory parade. They are worried about the protesters' health, they said, and feel they've stayed long enough to achieve a moral victory. More to the point, perhaps, their numbers are shrinking daily, even though they've attracted dribs and drabs of support from all sorts of places, like this Hong Kong Chinese who's a student at the University of Chicago.
I feel the student movement is very moving and touching.
The Forbidden City was still closed to tourists today, but the square was open, and some people found that a pretty good exchange.
I'm with the students. Everybody was wonderful, and they clapped their hands as we walked by.
When we told the students that we supported them, they had tears in their eyes.
Meanwhile, government television newscasts paraded support for Premier Li Peng and martial law. National People's Congress President Wan Lee, yesterday rumored to be under house arrest and considered a possible student supporter, made a speech backing Lee and the law. So did a lot of retired hardliners who haven't been seen in years. The formula is to say that the students' goals are good, but they've been misled by a bad anti-party minority. Zhao Ziyang, apparently, and his friends. This will allow the government to let students go home. Free train tickets home were being handed out at the square today, while the government concentrates its anger on Zhao and the gang of 6 or 5 or 7, whatever it turns out to be. Bruce Morton, CBS News, Beijing.
Leading advocates of government reform in the Soviet Union suffered a major blow today. Prominent reformers such as Boris Yeltsin, who were elected to the new People's Congress, failed to win election to the full-time Supreme Soviet. One losing candidate called on the reformers to unite to oppose the Communist Party, and thousands gathered tonight in Moscow to protest the election results. A delegation from the Organization of American States has ended a 4-day mission in Panama with a solution to the political standoff there as far away as ever. Frederick Tice has that story.
The OAS team left today without having resolved the major problem, getting General Manuel Noriega to sit down with the opposition to negotiate his departure.
It is a very complex situation. It's a very difficult problem. It will require an enormous effort from the Panamanians.
At the heart of the problem is this month's annulled presidential election. Guillermo Endara, who claims to have won, insists on taking office on September 1st. He expects Noriega to be out by then.
He could not be the commander-in-chief of the defense forces if I am president, because it would be impossible to be a real president under him. I would be a puppet, and I'm not going to be a puppet of Noriega.
But Endara's wishes clash with the demands of the general's allies.
That Noriega, the nationalist leader of Panama, is not negotiable. He is not going nowhere. He stays in Panama.
While the OAS talked, Noriega played a surprise game of high-risk politics. Told that U.S. troops were stationed across the street from his office, the general decided to take a look for himself. He stepped up to the main door of U.S. Navy headquarters, then took a stroll in the American facility, taunting his enemies. He was back on safe ground before anybody could react. It's all part of the psychological warfare between the general and the 12,000 U.S. troops now stationed here. Every day, American troops show off their firepower, facing off with a general determined to hold his ground. Frederick Tice, CBS News, Panama City.
Thousands of Muslims demonstrated today in London demanding Salman Rushdie's death and the banning of his novel, The Satanic Verses. An effigy of Rushdie was set on fire near Parliament. Police arrested more than 100 protesters after violence broke out between Iranian and Iraqi Muslims. Reports in Japan today say Foreign Minister Susuke Uno will be the new prime minister. The reports say the ruling party has picked Uno to succeed Norabu Takeshika. He, of course, has said he'll resign over a massive influence peddling scandal. As many as 7 people are reported missing after a bridge collapsed in Ohio. The one-lane bridge outside Cincinnati gave way last night when heavy rain sent the greater Miami River on a rampage. Officials believe at least 2 vehicles were on the bridge at the time. A lot of drivers in Tennessee are spending this holiday weekend in a National Guard armory. It is part of a crackdown on drinking and driving, and Christine Negroni reports.
Sir, you're under arrest for DUI.
It was the usual Friday night for the Metro Memphis Drunk Driving Squad. 29 arrests for driving under the influence.
My right finger. Your right finger. All right, put it back.
Deputies said this woman was charged after running a red light and hitting another car.
We're just scratching the surface of the DWIs that are actually out on the street.
That despite the fact that Tennessee now has one of the toughest drunk driving laws in the country. A first conviction gets a minimum 48 hours in jail. A second gets a mandatory 45 days.
Well, more than half of Memphis just drinks and drives, but we're just the ones that get caught. And if they caught all the people that drink and drive, they're not going to have enough room to put them.
That is exactly what's happening here. Tennessee's prisons, already overcrowded, just don't have the space for the thousands of people convicted of drunk driving. So National Guard armories have been turned into weekend jails.
The armory is set vacant. No reason to build other space for something of this nature at this time. Let's make use of the armories.
But for those who championed tougher penalties for intoxicated drivers, the relative luxury of a National Guard armory seems less than satisfying.
They've just got to pay their due. They should not have been out having a few drinks and driving. It's against the law.
But at least one inmate says he's learned his lesson.
I guess they're getting their point across. I know I'm not going to go out and drink and drive no more, so it just isn't worth it.
For every inmate like Thomas Ruddock, police say hundreds more will still drink and drive, which explains why Tennessee's armories are fast becoming overcrowded themselves. Christine Negroni, CBS News, Memphis.
Contracts covering 160,000 AT&T workers expire at midnight. A dispute over medical benefits is holding up a new deal. A strike would have little impact on AT&T direct dial long-distance service, but could delay operator-assisted calls. Competition held every 4 years and now underway once again in Fort Worth. Scott Pelley reports.
With athletic power and artistic passion, 38 of the best young pianists in the world began the Van Cliburn Competition. Careers to be made or broken in one of the most prestigious of all musical contests.
It's the Preakness, or the Kentucky Derby, maybe. It's up there.
29-year-old Wolfgang Mantz of West Germany committed his life to this moment, and he is nervous.
It is absolutely necessary to be nervous before, because if you are not nervous, I don't think that you would be able to achieve the highest artistic level.
Those who advance in the competition will play with a string quartet and then a full symphony, performing again and again through a grueling period of 2 weeks. In the last week, Mantz and his fellow artists have tested instruments and practiced hour after hour, seeking precision in the subjective world of art.
The problem is that in music you can never say what's right and wrong. So there is no real justice.
John Lill is one of 14 judges.
You need to have so many qualities to be a successful soloist, only one of which happens to be playing the piano.
I think the main ingredient is love. Love for what you're doing, love for your work, desire to work no matter what.
Van Cliburn, at age 23, won the 1958 Tchaikovsky competition in Moscow. He was instantly the most famous pianist in the world, the first classical artist to sell 1 million records. Now, 30 years later, young artists struggle to achieve the same success, as the judges search for both accuracy and passion, hoping to find something more than perfection. Scott Pelley, CBS News, Fort Worth.
It's a good place to stop. Dan Rather will anchor our coverage tomorrow from the NATO Summit in Brussels. Later tonight on West 57th, a report on Palestinians who fund Mideast terror with profits from illegal U.S. businesses. I'm Bob Schieffer, CBS News, New York. Good night.
Western Conference Finals, Game 4. It's time to rock and roll.
This is CBS.
Next.